There's a lot of text and subtext and nuance and historical items that I might not be fully aware of. But this is my introduction to your work, actually. I haven't seen your previous stuff. So my first question is, how did History of Fear and the movement sort of inform you of where you were leaning to stylistically or tonally, not necessarily the story of Rojo, but what tool set did you want to use for your third outing?
Yeah, so, you know, I don't know how it works with other people who make films, but it's hard to think in terms of like steps as in a climbing ladder, because I'm not sure I'm like going the right way, more like, you know, some
circular or sideways,
strange path, wherever that takes me. Just saying this because the films are different. Then again, in the first film I did this film called History of Fear, which is not, you know, it's not so accomplished. It's hard to make a first film and so on, but it tries to be a sort of a horror social film. So I'm a big fan of horror film. Big fan, and particularly Tom Hopper, Craven, Carpenter, you know, the classic, but the ones that were also a little bit political in somehow, you know, not the contemporary, you know, sort of video camera thing. And I tried to do like a film about gated communities in Argentina and the social paranoia from a horror style of filmmaking, but I didn't succeed so much at it, you know, because the film was more cold and auteur-ish than horror, you know, plain horror. So, and in this film, Rojo, that you've seen, maybe what I tried to do, and I feel more happy about it, is that to, you know, at first to create a sort of thriller, you know, like a dark humorish thriller, something like that, but to really be in the genre strings, and then of course unfold, you know, ideas and historic and political contradictions and so on. But then before that, really being in the strings of cinema, you know, in terms of these popular genres that have captivated, you know, audiences for long. And
certain constraints and conventions of within the genre film.
Being among, you know, this language of which is so present in any cinephile imaginarium, you know, and not creating, you know, of course I feel it's a personal film, but I think the personal, it's a bit concealed behind this genre approach, and I think that was a little bit the intention, no? To play among the 70s filmmaking style and the genre conventions of the time, and so on. And then the second film, which you haven't seen, 60 minutes, black and white, 4:30, it's like a square image, and it's set in the 19th century in the middle of the desert in Argentina. And it's a funny film because I had to shoot it in 9 days. I got a grant from South Korea, from the Jeonju Film Festival, which is a great festival. They give grants for you to make a feature film on the basis of you just pitching one phrase or one idea. They didn't want to read the script.
Wow.
So I shot that film, and I really like it. It's a very strange film about a politician in the 19th century trying to get followers, you know, and that's it. I think I would send you a link if you want.
Gracias.
And that's more of an experiment, like in the hardcore sense. Like it's a film that you know, follows no, I guess, no, only intuitions, you know. Whereas this Rojo that you've seen, I guess it's much more inscribed in certain, or tries to be among a tradition of how to deal with a political subject in the strings of genre, you know, something like that, I guess.
Would you say it's an overt not attack, but criticism of your country's past?
Yeah, I guess so, on past and maybe present also, you know. It's to people who live in that country still, you know, cultural idiosyncrasy hasn't changed so much, I would say. So the film also tries to deal with present issues for those who will be able to read that also. but yes, it does imply a great degree of criticism, I guess. You know, we see a community which is very miserable in their way to relate to one another and their way to relate to historic context. And I guess it's a portrait of a miserable community, miserable country. You know, that's what I'd say.
It's such a powerful, nonchalant way to open your film. It's a still frame and people going in and out of a home that was perhaps full of riches and is becoming a skeleton. How did that sequence come about? In what was the kernel of the idea? How did you go about writing that idea?
Yeah, well, for long in the script versions there was a sequence prior to that in which you would see a family having a gathering or a reunion, and in the middle of the reunion there would be an attack, like a subtle attack, like a couple of shootings from outside. You would be inside the house and you would sort of see things breaking and hearing panic, and they would start running out through the garden and climbing into other houses because they knew they were being hunted by military forces or paramilitary forces. Then that sequence was taken out of the script, mainly on the basis that we were going for a film which was, you know, about things not quite happening, but, you know, more echoing in what we saw. And eventually this sequence that you mentioned, in which we see the freeze and just people taking objects, came to be sort of the summarization of that gun sequence. And it was on the belief that it could be probably more powerful than just showing this party sequence, you know, and more of a synthesization. How do you say that word?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, sanitizing.
Synthesizing of a conceptual of what the movie was going to be further on.
Later on, there's this magic act that goes wrong. I was wondering if you could elaborate on you embedding ideas about eclipsing and erasing things and disappearing things, and specifically with that contemporary dancing, where it's the next generation that sort of like absorbs some of those behaviors.
Well, there was at first certainly an idea of portraying, you know, several generations through the film, you know, as to say that this was not a problem solely of grown-ups, but you know, a whole community in their wholeness, even the old women that we see at the house when they, you know, the empty house, and they were all together complicit, in a way to conceive life and human condition. And then about, you know, all these metaphors that you mentioned, the eclipse and the dancing and the magic trick that goes wrong. I guess the film has a lot of sort of acts. They become like acts, which are very, you know, evident metaphors of things that we're saying and not saying through the film. And I guess they you know, they just try to emphasize more and more a certain mood into the audience for him to review this you know, sort of dry character, very quiet, subtle character, the lead character, in a different way. After you see these acts, they're sort of given clues or leads on how to watch at these characters, which do not reveal themselves per se. You know, you have to unfold them.
One of those characters that is very one note is the Alfredo Castro character, and I deeply associate him to Tony Manero, and that was a text that also looks at dictatorship and the Pinochet dictatorship.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Tony Manero. It's a great film. It's a great performance.
Yeah,
Alfredo's best, probably. I really love that movie. That's the movie in which I discovered this tremendous performer, Alfredo. And then again, I guess, yeah, Tony Manero is really a psychological thriller, you know. I don't know if I would have to compare the film. And here it's a bit of a colder character, the one that Alfredo plays.
Yeah.
More inscribed in the tradition of 70s TV series, you know,
yeah.
with a certain dark humor, you know, and he has a much less physical character.
Yeah.
You know? He's more of a mental, cerebral presence, whereas in Tony Manero he's always, you know, dancing and all.
So in reference to him, and not, I don't want you to give me a history of Chile or Argentina, but I was trying to read up on how that Red Scare sort of like overlaps into your country. How, like, what does that character represent in terms of the discord or the attitude that was sort of like present in all the neighboring countries of Chile, like for that specific era?
Well, as you well said, there was a red paranoia, red phobia, which, you know, you don't even have to put it in the regional context. You can put it in a global context. It was a time of Cold War.
Yeah.
You know, you go through the 70s around the world. You have this phenomenon of kidnapping and disappearing people in Southeast Asia, as you saw in the films, Act of Killing. You know, you saw those documentaries. Very similar techniques by the ruling powers in those places, so distant and different from Latin America and all through Latin America, Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, Argentina. You know, of course, each country with its particularities and its differences, but we are in the 70s. You are assisting basically to the elimination of segments of people who thought there was a way of living differently in socialism, you know, right or wrong. In many countries, these people were just simply wiped out of the face of the earth, and that's what we're talking about in this film, as in Tony Manero, as in many films. And maybe what Rojo tries to put into the dialogue is that the fact that for ruling powers to be able to do this, you have a set of social and cultural conditions which have to be in place. You know, things just don't happen, you know, with a whole country ignoring them or not being part of. That's maybe what the thesis of the project, but I think that's clear enough.
You get a sense of that disease spreading. I'll end off with two things. So you just got a distribution deal for the U.S., so that's good news. That's early January, I believe.
I think they're still working out on the release date, but I think it will be January, February, something like that.
And I read that you're already in the funding stages for Rosa de Cobra.
Yeah, that's
so I'll ask the question. I don't want to know what it's about, because I know that we're still protective when it's still its infancy stages. But perhaps what are the sort of the larger themes that you want to explore, or perhaps you have some visual or technical idea, like a language that you want to employ? Is like, where are you at artistically or in the writing phase with that?
Yeah, I'm sort of finishing a treatment. It's an adaptation of an expressionist novel from the 20s. Okay. And in terms of, I really want to explore like a super contemporary way to storytell in terms of art, also with the places I would like to shoot. You know? And it's also, I think the young people are being driven away from theater. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to try to approach their ways to see the world. You know?